despite how important a dance floor is for a dancer, what a sprung floor actually does for a dancer is really quite simple. And we're going to look at what these properties are in a sprung floor and how they can help a dancer throughout this course. But in this first video, we're going to look at this property of a dance floor that in biomechanics we refer to as work. So work is really referring to whether a floor is either absorbing or returning energy. So a floor can either absorb or return energy. That is the essential thing that a sprung floor does for a dancer. And when a floor absorbs energy, obviously it can take the load and the impact off of a dancer's legs. And when it returns energy, it can give the dancer a boost and to help them jump up away from the floor. So let's have a look at this concept of work and how it applies to a dance floor and how it can help a dance floor by absorbing and returning energy. So the first thing that a floor does is it will deliver a ground reaction force. So I'll just use GRF here, and the ground reaction force is represented by the red arrow that you can see there. So when the dancer contacts the dance floor, the ground reaction force is then pushing up back at the dancer from the floor. So we have a force relationship here. We have a ground reaction force coming from the floor. The second important property of a sprung floor, and arguably the most important property of a sprung floor, is that it can deform. So these two black arrows here represent the floor's ability to deform. And really that's just a fancy way of saying that the floor can move up and down. But it moves up and down in conjunction with the ground reaction force. So if we're to calculate work, if we're to use the formula for calculating work, then work, represented by a big W here, equals the force that is coming from the floor multiplied by the deformation that the floor is representing. And these two properties, the force times the deformation, dictate how much energy is either being absorbed by the floor or is being returned by the floor to the dancer. So the way that we differentiate whether a floor is either absorbing or returning energy is by the movement of the floor. So obviously when a dancer lands on a floor, the floor will move downwards. So it will deform downwards, it will compress. And the reason it can compress is because most dance floors are made up of these wooden type panels represented by the brown stripe here. And underneath the panels are these what are referred to as substructures. And they're either generally foam padding or wooden battens that are crisscrossed like a basket weave. And they give the floors the ability to deform. So when a floor is absorbing energy, when a dancer lands on the floor, the substructures compress. So we've got a compression. They compress, and as a result we get absorption. So we get absorb. When a floor is returning energy, the floor is moving back up to its resting state, and so that means that it will return the energy back to the dancer. Mathematically, all this means is that if the force is always going to be pushing up, the ground reaction force is always pushing up. When the floor is absorbing energy, it means that the deformation is in the opposite direction to the force. When the floor is returning energy, it means that it's pushing up and the deformation, the movement of the floor, is occurring in the same direction as the ground reaction force. And this is really the essential component of a sprung floor, is its ability to perform work, to absorb and return energy to the dancer. So the reason why a sprung floor is not concrete, and the reason why you would never really start a studio with a concrete floor, is because a concrete floor cannot deform. So the ground reaction forces actually between a sprung floor and between a concrete floor aren't that different, believe it or not, because the dancer will control the force and adjust their legs depending on whether they're going to land on a sprung or a concrete floor. And we're going to look at that in the upcoming sections. The big difference between a sprung floor and a concrete floor is that a sprung floor can deform. And because a sprung floor can deform, it can then perform work. And because it can perform work, it can absorb and return energy to the dancer and hopefully help them to perform at their best.